Good evening, everyone. Before we begin the class, we just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for the Kiddush Food for Thought this week, sponsored by Yuri Shliansky and Deborah Topper. We thank you very much for sponsoring in honor of Yuri's father, Leib ben Meir Isaac, and Deborah's grandmother, Sarah Bas Mordechai. Their neshamas should go to the highest points in Gan Eden, Shav, and Aliyah through
Amen.
our learning. Kiddush Food for Thought this week is also sponsored by Eva Shore, in memory of her dear mother, Clara Fishman, Yentel Bas Naftali, on the 10th anniversary of her passing. Her neshama should go to the highest points in Gan Eden through our learning and ascend higher and higher. Parshas Re'eh is personally one of my favorite parshios because it is absolutely jam-packed. Just from learning Parshas Re'eh, you can learn Kol HaTorah Kula. You can learn almost everything. Contained within the parsha has so many principles in Jewish thought, in practice, in halacha, in so many areas. So with a parsha like that, it's a challenge to be able to focus ourselves to one topic. But I chose one topic that I think is quite appropriate for what we are experiencing now. As we go through this mitzvah, you'll see what I mean. The pasuk tells us in Perek Yud Dalid pasuk Aleph. The pasuk tells us the following: Banim atem la'Hashem Elokeichem, that we are the children of God. Moshe tells us in his monologue in the weeks before his passing. Moshe Rabbeinu tells us that we are the children of God. Banim atem la'Hashem Elokeichem, which in and of itself you have to just stop and just recognize that we, as we are approaching Elul, we're approaching Rosh Hashanah, that we have to remind ourselves that our davening, our connection to God, it's not to some foreign being, it is to our Avinu Shebashamayim, it's to our Father in heaven, because the Torah tells us, Banim atem la'Hashem Elokeichem, we are the children of God. And therefore, says the Torah, Lo tiskodadu, that you shall not create factions. Do not gash yourself. Do not cut yourself. Velo tasimu karcha bein einechem lames. And nor should you make some sort of a circular symbol around your head between your eyes for a deceased person. Now, Rashi explains exactly what this means. It seems quite foreign to us what this is referring to. But Rashi tells us, Rashi says, lo tiskodadu. You should not make these separations, these divides in your skin. Lo titnu gedida v'seret b'vsarechem al meis kederech shaha'emorim osim. That one should not make these gashes in their skin the way that some pagan societies do, because again, we are the children of God. We follow the Torah. We follow the Torah's precepts when it comes to mourning, and we shouldn't try and follow the other nations' practices when it comes to mourning. We have a Torah that gives us these guidelines. But this halacha of lo tiskodadu is actually more encompassing than just making physical gashes. The Gemara in Yevamos actually tells us that there's another halacha that we learn from lo tiskodadu. Says the Gemara in Yevamos on Daf Yud Daled Amud Aleph. Just interesting to point out, by the way. Again, I was actually speaking with Gidon this morning about another similar thing like this. A fun fact that the pasuk of Lo Tiskodadu in the Torah is in Devarim Perek Yud Dalid, chapter 14, pasuk Aleph, 14:1. The 14a, 14:1. The Gemara about Lo Tiskodadu, about this, do not make these cuts, these breaks, is in Mesachas Yevamos on page 14a. Daf Yud Daled Amud Aleph, 14a and 14a. Just interesting, a fun fact to throw out. So the Gemara tells us the following. Amar Rava says, Ki amrinan lo tiskodadu, that when the Torah says lo tiskodadu, what is it also referring to? Kegon beis din bi'ir achas. It's like if you have a beis din, you have a rabbinical court in one city. Plag morin kidivre beishamai. Some of them, half of the rabbinic judges, half of the judges, they paskin, they give over their halacha like Beis Shammai, uplag morin kedivrei Beis Hillel, and half of them paskin like Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, two of the major Talmudic academies, and they each went through the halacha in two different ways. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, they both are legitimate, but it would be a problem, says Rava in the Gemara over here in Yevamos and Daf Yudalid, it'd be a problem if the same Beis Din paskins in two different ways. Okay? However, aval shnei batei dinim, however, if you have two separate rabbinical courts, bi'ir achas, in the same city, leis lamba, not a problem. Which the Gemara is basically telling us that this halacha of lo tiskodedu is not just a halacha of creating these physical gashes in your skin, but it's creating any sort of factions, any sort of separations, any sort of polarizations, that we create these divides within our community. That's a problem. That if you have the same Beis Din poskening like two completely different schools of thought, that can create an issue. Now, what's the issue that could be created from this? So it's just interesting to point out, Rashi says that the issue that may come from creating these separations from one Beis Din, which let's just give an example what that would look like. Let's say you have one shul that davens both Nusach Ashkenaz and Nusach Sfard. The same shul, they daven two different nischos, right? That would be quite strange, right? You have a shul that's an Ashkenazi shul, and then you have a separate shul that's a Nusach Sfard shul. You have another shul that is a Sephardic shul. You have a Hasidic shul. You have these different types of shuls, but in the same shul, it would be quite interesting. Now, Rashi tells us what would be the potential issue with having something like this. So Rashi says the following: Denira kenoagin based Torahs. It's like you're looking at two separate Torahs. It's almost as if the Beis Din sending a message that God gave us two Torahs. God didn't give us two Torahs. God gave us one Torah, and therefore we have to stick to a unified front. That this is the way to understand the Torah, and this is the way we're supposed to paskin. So if you have the from one Beis Din coming out these two separate models, that can create a problem because it will look like two Torahs. The Rambam takes a different approach, though. The Rambam, if you take a look over here, the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, in the halachos of Avodah Zarah, where he talks about this prohibition of making these cuts within yourself. So he uses the opportunity to talk about this other aspect of lo tiskodedu, which is creating these factions from the same Beis Din. It says the Rambam Ubechlal Azar Azeh that included in this prohibition, shelo yesh shnei batei dinim be'ir achas, that you can't have two Beis Dins in one city. Zeh noeg k'minhag zeh, v'zeh noeg k'minhag acher. He says there'd be a problem if you have, these two Beis Dins coming out of the same city. Shedavar zeh gorem lemachlokes gedolos, because it's going to lead to tremendous machlokes. It's going to lead to big disputes between within the city. That if you have it like this, if you have coming out of the same place two different approaches, it can create a lot of tension, and that is a problem. Now, the Netziv, just so we should point out, what's really the difference between Rashi and Tosos? So the Netziv of Naftali Tzvi of Berlin, the Rosh Yeshiva of the Volozhin Yeshiva from 1853 until its closing in 1982, the Netziv, who, by the way, used to give a Parsha shir every single Friday morning in the Volozhin Yeshiva. The Friday morning was the famous Parsha shir that the Netziv gave that ended up turning into his Sefer, Ha'amek Davar. Ha'amek Davar is a beautiful commentary on the Torah, where the Netziv uses the Gemara, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, to help you understand pshat in the Torah. It's a fascinating work because very often we look at it as two separate things. There's the written Torah and there's the way to understand the written Torah. And then from the written Torah, sometimes we can learn some oral tradition. But what the Netziv does is he tries to mold the two, to create synergy between the two. It's a fascinating work. But anyway, the Netziv says that there's a major difference between Rashi and the Rambam. Again, Rashi said that the prohibition of lo tiskodedu, of creating these factions, is that it's going to look like two separate Torahs. Well, we know God gave us one Torah, not two Torahs, as opposed to the Rambam who says, no, it's not. We're not concerned it's going to look like two different Torahs. People will understand that it's one Torah, but what is it going to end up leading to? To major machlokas. The practical difference between Rashi and Tosos would be in the realm of minhag. I gave the example before about a shul, or let's say even a person. I'll give you an example. Something I got guidance from on my Rabbi Hershel Schachter is, I grew up in a Sephardic shul. That was my family's customs are Sephardic customs. So when I was in yeshiva, though, yeshiva is an Ashkenazi yeshiva. So when I would daven with the yeshiva, or even davening in shul, right here in Adat Yeshurun. So it poses a little bit of a quandary, which is, being that my minhagim are Sephardic, but I'm davening in an Ashkenazi shul, so what do I do? So the halacha is, and it's pretty clear like this in the Shulchan Aruch and the Poskim, is that anything that would be public, you need to make sure that you stick to the minhag hamakom. You stick to the minhag, the custom of the place that you're in. So, for example, let's say like kedusha or kaddish, which is an out loud tefillah. It's you're not davening quietly to yourself, but you are doing something that is physical and something that's apparent and obvious. So there, if you were to say, let's say, a Sephardic kaddish in an Ashkenaz shul, that would be, according to the Rambam, lo tiskodedu, because that could potentially create a problem. It's not sticking within the minhag of the place. Or, for example, let's say Kedusha. The Kedusha for a Sephardic community and the Kedusha for an Ashkenazi community are different. So if I'm responding to the Kedusha in an Ashkenazi shul, I better do it the way that the Ashkenazim do it, not the way that the Sephardim do it, because that's going to create a problem. Or like according to the Rambam, it's going to create a problem because that needs to stick within the minhag. Otherwise, it can create an issue. According to Rashi, it's only things that are halachos, not minhagim. Anyway, but so I asked Rav Schachter about being a rabbi in an Ashkenazi community. What do I do? What do I do then? So he told me, he said, well, it's the same principle, but it just applies in more scenarios. He told me basically, being that I'm in this position, I should switch over completely to Ashkenazi unless I'm in my own home. In my own home, I could stick to my Sephardic minhagim. At shul, though, I should be completely Ashkenazi. Why? Because very often there are people in shul that are looking to the rabbi to see what they're supposed to do, right? So being that they need to be taught an Ashkenaz way of doing things in an Ashkenazi shul, therefore the rabbi also needs to stick to those Ashkenaz minhagim. Anyway, I go off on a tangent. So the problem with all of this, the problem with this halacha, or the question we really need to ask when learning this halacha of lo tiskodedu, which again, the Gemara in Yevamos tells us is this halacha not just of creating these gashes in your skin, a very unique thing that applies to if someone's trying to take on a pagan practice, but something much, much, much more practical, which is doing something that will create variety in the way we practice the Torah is a problem. But what did Rava tell us? If you take a look again, Rava told us that while, yes, that is true that if you have in one shul these different practices, it can create a problem. One Beis Din create an issue. Aval, says Rava, aval shnei batei dinim bi'ir achas. But if you have two completely separate institutions, then leis lamba, that's not an issue. Like we said before, you can have an Ashkenazi shul, you can have a Sephardic shul, you can have a Hasidic shul. The problem can arise when you intermingle and you combine them into one. But two separate shuls, that's no problem. No problem at all. Not a violation of Lotus Go to do. But one can argue and say, well, if you look at the Torah, and really not just look at the Torah, but look at when the Torah was given, you see that it seems that God seems to indicate that he would prefer if everyone did exactly the same thing, meaning that there is no such thing as an Ashkenazi shul and a Sephardic shul and a Hasidic shul, but there's one type, there's one nusach, God nusach, Torah nusach, not Ashkenazim, Sephardic, Hasidim. You have one way of doing things. Look at what it says in the Torah when we receive the Torah. We came to Har Sinai, vayachanu bamidbar. We camped in the wilderness. Vayicham sham Yisrael neged ahar. In the singular voice, we encamped by the mountain. Rashi tells us, why is the Torah using a singular language here? Because Ke'ish echad belev echad. We were all on the same page. We were all doing the same thing. We were all adhering to the same Torah. We were unified. So hold on one second. The Torah seems to be defining that the highest level of Achdut, the highest level of unity, is when we all do the same thing. But the Gemara seems to be endorsing this varied approach, where you have a Sephardic shul, and you have an Ashkenazi shul, and you have a Hasidic shul. But hold on one second. That's not the way it was at Har Sinai. The way it was at Har Sinai was, Ki'ish echad belev echad. We were all on the same page. We were all doing exactly the same thing. If God would prefer for us to be like that, which Rashi seems to be saying that this was a positive thing, that we were all doing exactly the same thing, then why is it that the Gemara would endorse this varied approach of people doing different things? So the Chafetz Chaim, the holy Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, passed away in 1933. If you stop and contemplate for a moment, and I would encourage everyone to read, whenever you have the opportunity, read about the life of the Chafetz Chaim. You can't help but just be in awe, even of the fact that we get to learn the Chafetz Chaim's Torah. He was such a unique person. Like, I like to refer to him as, there are certain people that you meet in life where they kind of just like get it. Like, they're just, across the board, they're just good people, right? Like the salt of the earth, just like good people. That was the Chafetz Chaim, like times 10. Like, he was down to earth and normal, but also like hung out in the heavens. Like, he was just really the tzaddik of the generation, the centurion of the 20th century. The Chafetz Chaim was unbelievable. So the Chafetz Chaim deals with this issue, and what the Chafetz Chaim's answer is that he says basically there's a difference between there's a difference, says the Chafetz Chaim, between unity and singularity. There's a difference between us in Judaism being unified, having Achdus, that's unity. But then there's a separate thing which is called singularity. Or, in the corporate world, it would be considered something like groupthink. Everyone is on the exact same page. Everyone is adhering to one way of looking at things. That is not what we subscribe to in the Torah. God likes variety. God likes unity that embraces differences. Vayichan sham Yisrael neged ahar. We were there in a unified fashion, not in a singular fashion. Ki'ish echad belev echad. Like a singular heart, like a single person. Now, both a heart and a person, you ask the doctors that are on the call, are quite complex, and they have different pieces to them. We have 10 fingers, 10 toes, so many different organs. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth. There's a lot of pieces to us. A heart, different chambers, different arteries, different veins, every single electrical signals. There is a lot of pieces to it, and every piece adds up together. The Chavetz Chaim takes another mashal. When they asked the Chavetz Chaim this question, he looked at everyone and he said, take a look over here. This is the Chavetz Chaim al HaTorah, where they took the Chavetz Chaim's teachings and put it according to the Torah, in order of the Torah. Take a look at what it says. Ad sha'ata shaluni al hakasav al hakusis be'amenu. He says, why are you asking me about these different types of Jews that we have Hasidim and Sfardim and Ashkenazim, and even amongst Hasidim you have Vishnitz and Satmar and Ger, and you have all these different types of Jews, all these different types of. Why are you asking me? Ach v'shol as Kesar Harusi. Why don't you go ask the Kesar in Russia? Go ask the Minister of Defense. Don't ask me. Why should you ask him? He says, ask him the same thing. Why do you need so many different types of soldiers? Holchei regel, you have foot soldiers. And rochvim al susim, you have those that ride on horses. Yordim bitachtonim, you have people that go underneath the ground. Umafim ba'avironim, you have those that are in the Air Force. Vatzolim b'mayim adirim, you have people that are in the Navy. You have all these different types of soldiers, generals. You have all these different types of people. Why? Pick one type of soldier. Sounds ridiculous. If you had an army that had one type of soldier, they'd lose the war every single time, every single battle. They'd lose every single time. You need to have people taking different jobs, doing different things. And together, every society needs that. We need accountants, and we need investment bankers, and we need doctors, and we need lawyers, and we need rabbis, I think. We need all these different types of people, and together we make a beautiful functioning society. That it's the way that you have unity. God doesn't subscribe to singularity. That's not what we're looking for. The Netziv, in one of his Friday Shiurim that was recorded in the Hamek Davar, in his introduction to Bereshis, the Netziv writes the following. He says that this was exactly the problem during Churban Bayasheni. The destruction of the Second Temple was because we couldn't handle the fact that we could have variety and unity at the same time. That we thought that was a contradiction. No, that was not a contradiction. That is exactly what God wanted us to subscribe to, but we couldn't handle it. It's exactly what the Netziv says right over here. Because of the sinas chinam they held in their hearts, anyone that didn't adhere to the way I thought, I looked at as a bad person. I looked at them as a heretic if they didn't subscribe to my way of thinking and my approach to the Torah. This led to all of the destruction until the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. That it's because of and that's what led to this sinas chinam. And today, that's what really leads to so much of the negativity we have towards people. In the fact that if someone doesn't agree with me, that makes them into a bad person. No, I can have a disagreement without having war. I could have a different way of looking at something without hating the person, without having to look at them weird again or be awkward with them. No, I have my way of looking at things. I'm comfortable with who I am as a person, and I'm comfortable with the way you are as a person. And God likes variety, of course, as long as it's within the framework that the Torah prescribes to us. Straight from Har Sinai, Moshe taught us the way that you get to these varied approach of Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. But at the end of the day, if each one is taking a legitimate path to get to their conclusion, then that is celebrated in Judaism. The Magen Avram points out something absolutely beautiful. He says that's why it's important for someone who's Sephardic to stick to their Sephardic roots, and someone who's Ashkenazi to stick to their Ashkenazi roots. However, if let's say you have a Sephardic davening in an Ashkenazi minyan, or an Ashkenazi davening in a Sephardic minyan, not a problem. Why? Because look at what the Magen Avram says. He quotes from the Arizal. Amam minhagim shenagu b'sharshi atfila. The different minhagim, the different customs we have in davening. Ein lishanos minhag mikomo. You should never stray away from the minhag that you were brought up with. Ki yud beis sha'arim b'shamayim. Because there are 12 gates in heaven. Neged yud beis shvatim. In according to the 12 tribes. The kol shevet yesh lo shar. Every single tribe has their own gate. Every single person, every approach has their own gate to heaven. God embraces the variety as long as you don't lose the unity while embracing the variety. We're not looking for groupthink. We're not looking for a singular approach. We're looking for a variedied approach that still adheres to the unity. And this actually speaks to a halacha that's actually brought down in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says that there's a halacha that one should strive. He quotes from the Zohar in Parshas Emor that one should strive to have 12 windows in a shul. V'tov shiyu b'beis hakneses yud beis chalonos. You should have 12 windows in a shul in order to express this notion of that we celebrate this variety, we celebrate these different approaches, of course, keeping within unity. This is the halacha of lo tiskodedu. Lo tiskodedu doesn't say you are not allowed to have different approaches. Lo tiskodedu says that in the same place, don't confuse people. However, that doesn't mean that we don't embrace all of these different approaches, that they're beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. You know, there's a yeshiva in the old city of Yerushalayim called Yeshivat HaKotel. Yeshivat HaKotel did an unbelievable thing, and I think they're continuing to do it. I think that they're going to be putting on another program. They've already run 3 programs called the Vayicham program that are so, even if you don't participate in them, just knowing that they exist is something that is inspirational. It's something that is profound. It's something revolutionary, what they did. That since this pandemic began and people were shut down and we had to transfer over onto this online platform, they've already put together 3 programs, online programs, connecting all of Klal Yisrael. The Vayicham program. On their program, it's like each one was like 24 hours of learning.
Where are you going?
Each of those 24 hours of learning included all different types of educators, of Rabbanim, of Rosh Yeshiva, to the point where you had Rav Beryl Parvarsky, the Rosh Yeshiva of Panovich, with Rav Herschel Schechter, who's the posek for the Mizrahi community, the religious Zionist community in America, and you have educators that are that are more yeshivish bending, that are also female educators. You have female educators that are Mizrahi. You have historians. Literally every type of Jewish educator and rabbi and Rosh Yeshiva from across the spectrum. I don't know how they did it, but they got everyone onto one poster for one event called the Vayicham program. They've done it 3 times already. Each one is more, they have chief rabbis, people that you would have assumed would have had nothing to do with each other. But it sends a message of we embrace this variety. God loves variety. He loves these different approaches because it's a Torah's Chaim. And just like in life, there are all of these different pieces to a society, all these different pieces to life, and they all come together into this organism called life. Torah is the same way. It's a Torah's Chaim. It's a living Torah with so many avenues to connect with it. That's why the Beis Halevi says that Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah. We say the night of the Seder that according to the 4 sons, the Torah was written, because there are a number of different approaches to understanding the Torah, a number of different ways that the Torah speaks to a person. And when we embrace this type of a variety, that is what creates true practice. I give everyone a bracha that we should be able to embrace this unity, and hopefully through doing so, we will be able to bring Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mheira b'yameinu. Amen. Wonderful learning with everyone. We'll stop here. I'm just going to, I can hang on for a couple minutes if anyone has any questions or just want to schmooze for a little bit. I'm happy to stay for a little while. Great to see everyone.
Thank you.